Now, we have talked a lot on this program about America's growing problem with inequality, and one of the hidden causes of that has been the widening social divide. It's the high rate of incarceration, particularly amongst young African-American men. Professor Bruce Weston is the director of the Malcolm Weiner Centre for Social Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He's a Queenslander by birth, and he was back in Australia as a guest of the United States Studies Centre. There seems to be quite a disparity between incarceration rates in the United States and Australia by a multiple of 7 or 10 times as many in the US. We're quite similar, or at least we think of ourselves as quite similar. Why such a difference?
Well, the US is really different from every other country in the world in this respect. It's got this massive prison population, over 2 million people now, and the system is unusually punitive. It polices drugs very intensively, mandates prison time for drug offences, and also imposes extremely long sentences for repeat offenders and violent offences.
One of the things that defenders of the system will say, yeah, but it works. It gets violent criminals off the streets, violent crimes down 25% in 20 years. We're winning the war.
That's what that's definitely what they say. But the picture's more complicated than that. And if we look at the last 3 or 4 decades, crime rates have fluctuated a lot. So they've increased at some points and they've decreased at others. But all through this period, the incarceration rate has increased steadily.
If you listen to Ron Paul, and I do tweeters, he says that it's all about the drug war. That the reason why there's so many people in prison in America is it's completely about drug war, and none of them should be there in the first place. Is that true, that the drug war is the reason for such large numbers?
The drug war is a big driver of the growth in prison populations. It's about a third of the story, I think. The other thing that's going on, and so what the drug war is doing is that it mandates prison time for people who get convicted of felony drug offences, and which is very unusual from an international point of view. The other thing that's driving the growth of the prison population are very long sentences, life sentences, life without parole, big enhancements for people who have committed multiple felonies, so 3 strikes laws and things like that. The other thing that's driving the population is the way parole supervision works. People on parole are at very great risk of being reincarcerated for technical violations of the conditions of their parole, failing a drug test, missing an appointment. And that third piece has also been a big driver.
What about private prisons? Because you hear a lot about how you've got these private prisons, and often they're tied in with various political parties, and they almost write their legislation which controls the number of people who end up in prison. And so there's an incentive for them to write very, very tough laws so that their prisons are always full.
Yeah, I think that story is a little bit oversold. About 5 to 10% of prison beds in the adult system in the United States are private, and the rest of the system is state-controlled. In juvenile justice, which hasn't seen the massive increase in numbers that the adult system has seen, that system is entirely privatised. But there are all these private vendors also that are selling services to prisons, the food system, the catering, and the catering, that's probably not the best description of food in prison. Things like laundry and clothing and so on. All of those private vendors are also making money from the system, and they do have a vested interest in a big prison population.
Right now, for African American men aged 20 to 34, big chunk of the population, more than 10% of them are in jail today.
That's correct.
It's an astonishing statistic. What is the wider social impact on the African-American community, the fact that 10% of their parenting-aged men are locked up?
Yeah, this is a great question, I think. And if we go to the bottom part of the education distribution, if we look at those young black men who have dropped out of high school, a third of those men are in prison or jail today, which is an extraordinary number. And I think that has devastating consequences for the African American community. It disrupts marriage markets, and so marriage rates are very low. It diminishes economic opportunity, so those men are not bringing a lot to the table financially after they get out of prison. The children in the families of people who are incarcerated also suffer negative effects, depressive symptoms, aggressive behaviour, diminished school achievement. So this has very far-reaching effects on the social and economic well-being of the African American population.
And they can't vote either in most states.
And so in 13 states there's a permanent disability on voting rights, and but there's a lot of, even in the other states where voting rights are restored after you've served your time, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety about whether or not you can vote, and so people tend to vote at lower rates.
By the way, is it true that in some places in America, the poor people who are in jail have to pay for their own jail time?
Yes.
Seems odd.
So there are all sorts of fees and financial obligations that are being assessed on people under criminal justice supervision. We're conducting a study in Massachusetts at the moment, and following people coming out of prison there, and so there are often fees associated with jail supervision. People have to pay for drug testing. They have to pay probation fees. So when they meet with their probation officer, they have to pay about $70 for this fortnightly meeting.
On a related subject of social and economic inequality, one of the other things you've been looking at is union membership in the United States. It's very contentious at the moment, particularly in places like Wisconsin and so on, collective bargaining rights. You've been tracing this over decades now, at a time when union membership has been declining. What's been the social impact?
So there's been this long-standing decline in union membership that really dates from the 1950s, and it's very, very strongly associated with the growth in income inequality. And you look at industries and regions that were highly unionised. As unionisation declined, income inequality increased, and unions were a very powerful institutional force for equalising wages, not only within union plants but across the labour market as a whole, and that economically egalitarian force in the US labour market has really disappeared.
Do you see any potential replacement for unions down the pike in 10 or 20 years, a new kind of interest group for the working class?
This is the big question, I think. Union membership as we knew it is gone. It's a dead letter. It's not going to revive. And so is there going to be some sort of functional substitute which provide working people with a voice in their workplace? And it's very difficult to see under the current political conditions how this could revive.
Bruce Weston, thank you very much for joining us on Planet America.
It's a pleasure.